The spotlight burned hot against Dean Martin's face as he stood center stage at the Sand Hotel in Las Vegas. February 1962. The Copa Room was packed wall to wall with high rollers, movie stars, and socialites who had paid top dollar to see the legendary Rat Pack perform. Dean's tuxedo felt suddenly tight around his collar as Frank Sinatra strode onto the stage with that characteristic swagger, martini glass in hand, his blue eyes glinting with mischief that Dean knew too well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank announced into the microphone, his voice smooth as Tennessee whiskey, "I'd like to introduce you to my dear friend, Dean Martin, the man who makes drinking look like an art form." The audience laughed, but there was an edge to Frank's tone that made Dean's stomach tighten. They had been friends for over a decade, brothers in arms through countless performances, films, and late nights that blurred into early mornings. But lately, something had shifted in Frank's demeanor, a competitiveness that bordered on cruelty. Dean forced his trademark lazy grin, the one that charmed millions, and raised his own glass. "Well, Frank, at least I make it look easy. You make everything look like work." The audience roared with approval, but Frank's smile never reached his eyes. He moved closer, circling Dean like a prize fighter sizing up an opponent. "You know what they say about Dean," Frank continued, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "He's got the voice of an angel and the liver of a steel worker. Too bad he saves all his passion for the bottle instead of his performances." The joke landed harder than intended. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but many sat in uncomfortable silence. Dean felt the heat rising in his cheeks, not from anger but from something deeper, a wound to his pride that cut through years of carefully constructed persona. Dean had grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of Italian immigrants who had instilled in him the values of famiglia, respect, and dignità. His father, Gaetano Crocetti, had worked as a barber, and his mother Angela had taught him that a man's character was measured not by how he treated those above him, but by how he responded when someone tried to diminish him. She would cross herself and quote from Matthew, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Dean had never considered himself particularly meek, but he understood the deeper meaning. That true strength came from restraint, from choosing peace over retaliation. Standing there under the unforgiving lights, with Frank's words still hanging in the air like cigarette smoke, Dean made a choice. He could fire back with something equally cutting, could start a war of words that would entertain the crowd but destroy a friendship, or he could do something that required far more courage. He set down his glass slowly, deliberately, and walked the piano at the edge of the stage. The room fell completely silent. Even Frank seemed caught off guard, his prepared follow-up joke dying on his lips. Dean sat at the bench, his fingers finding the keys with the same natural grace that had made him a star. He began to play a melody that few in the audience would recognize, an old Italian hymn his mother had sung to him as a child, Ave Maria, arranged in a jazz tempo that somehow maintained its sacred reverence. When Dean began to sing, his voice carried none of the practiced nonchalance of his hit records. This was raw, unfiltered emotion poured into every note. He sang in Italian first, the words flowing like a prayer, then seamlessly transitioned to English. The lyrics spoke of grace, of forgiveness, of the strength it takes to love someone even when they hurt you. He wasn't performing for the audience anymore. He was singing for Frank, for their friendship, for the brother he found in this complicated, brilliant, insecure man who stood frozen at center stage. The theology of the moment transcended any single denomination. In that crowded nightclub, with its clinking glasses and cigarette haze, Dean created something approximating a cathedral. The Catholic faith of his upbringing merged with the universal human need for redemption and connection. He understood what Frank was struggling with, the pressure of being the chairman of the board, the weight of always having to be the toughest, the most talented, the most respected. Frank's cruelty had come from his own fear of being overshadowed, of losing relevance in an industry that devoured its stars with ruthless efficiency. As Dean's fingers moved across the keys, he remembered a conversation they had shared years earlier after a particularly grueling recording session. Frank had confessed, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that he feared being forgotten in this business. Frank had said, staring into his drink, "You're only as good as your last hit, and when the hits stop coming, they forget your name before your body's even cold." Dean had tried to reassure him then, but the words had fell hollow. Now, through this improvised performance, he was offering something more profound, a demonstration that true artistry, true friendship, transcended competition and ego. The song built to its crescendo, and Dean held the final note with such power and purity that several women in the audience were openly weeping. When the last chord faded into silence, no one moved. The pause stretched for what felt like an eternity before the room erupted in applause unlike anything the Copa Room had ever witnessed. People were standing, shouting, some even calling out for an encore, but Dean didn't acknowledge them. He stood from the piano and walked directly to Frank, who stood rooted to his spot, his martini glass trembling slightly in his hand. Dean stopped inches from Frank's face, close enough that only the two of them could hear what came next. "Frank," he said quietly, his voice steady and warm, "I love you like a brother. I always have. I always will. But if you ever try to tear me down to build yourself up again, I won't fight you. I'll just walk away, and you'll have to live with knowing you lost the best friend you ever had over your own insecurity." Frank's jaw worked silently for a moment, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The great Frank Sinatra, who had faced down mob bosses and studio executives without flinching, looked like he might crumble. "Dean, he started," but Dean held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything now," Dean continued. "But think about what matters more, being the biggest star in the room, or being the kind of man your mother would be proud of." He squeezed Frank's shoulder once, firmly, then walked off stage to thunderous applause, leaving Frank alone in the spotlight. Backstage, Dean collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking from the adrenaline. Sammy Davis Jr. appeared at his side, pressing a glass of water into his hand. "That was something else, Dean," Sammy said softly. "I've never seen anything like it." Dean just nodded, too emotionally spent to respond. He had gambled everything on that moment, his pride, his reputation, his friendship with the most powerful man in show business. He had no idea if it would work. 15 minutes later, as Dean sat alone in his dressing room, there was a knock at the door. Frank entered without waiting for permission, his face red and streaked with tears he no longer bothered to hide. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "My mother," he said, his voice breaking, "used to tell me that a real man knows when to apologize. She said it takes more strength to admit you're wrong than keep pretending you're right." Dean looked up at his friend, seeing past the bravado and swagger to the scared kid from Hoboken who had fought his way to the top and was terrified of falling. "Dolly was a wise woman," Dean said gently, referring to Frank's mother with the respect she deserved. Frank crossed the room and did something Dean had never seen him do before. He knelt down, like a penitent at confession. "I'm sorry, Dean. God help me, I'm so sorry. You're the best friend I've got, and I almost destroyed that because I was jealous. Jealous of how easy it all seems for you, how people love you without you even trying, how you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Tears fell freely now, and Frank made no effort to stop them. "I've been carrying this anger, this fear, and I took it out on you. That's not what friends do. That's not what brothers do." Dean slid off his chair and knelt beside Frank, pulling him into an embrace that would have scandalized the gossip columnists if they had seen it. Two of the toughest, most masculine stars in Hollywood, holding each other and crying like children. "We're all scared, Frank," Dean whispered. "Every single one of us. But we don't have to carry it alone. That's what family is for, sharing the weight so no one breaks under it." They stayed like that for several minutes, two men finding their way back to each other through the simple act of honest vulnerability. When they finally pulled apart, Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh. "Jesus, if the papers get wind of this, they'll have a field day." Dean grinned, his natural humor returning. "Let them talk. I'd rather be known as the guy who cried with his friend than the guy who was too proud to forgive him." He stood and helped Frank to his feet. "Besides, we got a second show in 2 hours. You think you can manage not to insult me for that long?" Frank pulled Dean into another quick hug, this one fierce and grateful. "I'll do better than that, Pally. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." And he kept that promise. From that night forward, Frank Sinatra became Dean Martin's most vocal champion. praising his talent, his character, and his friendship at every opportunity. Years later, when asked about that famous night in Las Vegas, Dean would smile his trademark lazy smile and say simply, "Frank and I had a little disagreement, but we worked it out. That's what brothers do." He never revealed the details, never capitalized on Frank's moment of weakness, never used it as leverage or gossip, because that was Dean's true genius. Not just his voice or his charm, but his fundamental decency, his ability to see past the surface to the wounded soul beneath. The incident became legend in its own way, though the true story remained known only to those present. It taught an entire generation that masculinity didn't mean never backing down or never showing emotion. It meant having the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to know that some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to fight at all. Dean Martin had silenced Frank Sinatra not with a cutting remark or a devastating comeback, but with something far more powerful: grace, love, and the kind of dignity that his immigrant parents had taught him was the measure of a real man. In the grand tradition of Italian famiglia and Catholic forgiveness, Dean had shown that the greatest victory comes not from humiliating your enemy, but from transforming them back into your friend.